if you've never seen anything from me before, I'm an actor. I've done various different videos about classical text, introducing you to all of Shakespeare's biggest competitors writing plays at the same time as him. All of Shakespeare's plays I've read or watched and tried to create the resources that I would have liked to have found about them. And now I'm going to try to introduce you to the ancient Greek playwrights. So for a bit of context, I started out training mostly in classical text actually at my youth theatre, and we actually worked on a few different monologues from these kind of plays, and I found it actually is structured quite similar to how Shakespeare is from my experience. So I feel like it would be really interesting to learn more about this material, because I feel like we always focus on Shakespeare a lot and not on a lot of the other really interesting plays. Like I've seen Medea, and that's really interesting. I think they're translated from Greek as well, so I just thought it would be nice to be able to introduce you, as I research into the ancient Greek playwrights. There seems to be the big main three Greek tragedy playwrights, so introduce you to them so that then we know what we want to look into more, what sparks our interest. So subscribe to follow the journey along and support me. I do really appreciate it if you can subscribe. Let's get to 600 subscribers, let's go. It's been interesting to hear people have such a strong love and affinity to these plays, especially women, because it's such a long time ago, and I think you can still connect to the humanity of characters within these plays, because human emotions always exist throughout history and throughout time. But I think it's interesting to also see that there are some events in ancient life that are a bit mad. Like, the lives of these people can also be quite unhinged and quite removed from what we experience these days. So I feel like it's been really interesting to look into it. So let me introduce you to them. So Aeschylus is widely considered to be potentially the earliest Greek tragedy writer, playwright, and wrote 90, and 7 still survive today, including a trilogy. So it's the only surviving trilogy of Greek tragedies. The Oresteia, I think it's called. My Greek is not the best. And I think it's really interesting because he's considered to be the father of tragedy, and potentially even the father of theatre, because he introduced the second actor. So before then it was just one actor interacting with a chorus, but he introduced a second actor, which allowed the plot to be able to progress a lot more. So it made theatre and live performance a lot more plot-centric, which I think is so interesting. So Sophocles has been credited widely with the idea of introducing a third actor into theatre and into plays, which allows for more development of plot and story. And also, Sophocles is widely successful back in the day with the competitions that they had. They seem to have state-funded competitions in theatre, and I think that's interesting because I think the ancient Greek people also had the Olympics, and now we have sport as a competitive, intense thing, but not so much the arts. Whereas really I think there is also a lot of work that goes into auditioning and self-taping for loads of different roles. It's a very intense industry, but I think the setup and the culture now, with it not being so much a formal competitive thing, makes us view it in a different way. So I wonder how theatre would be perceived differently if we did still have lots of state-funded competitions, although I think they do have stuff like that, like in Jamaica, but that's a side note. But he was really successful in them because he entered, I think, 30, and he won 24, and he never placed lower than second place. And some of his famous works include Antigone, Oedipus Rex. So Euripides is the most modern out of the 3 big main Greek tragedy playwrights, and he wrote over 90, and I think 19 survive. So that's quite a lot that survive, including Medea, the Trojan Woman, and lots of Greek tragedy plays actually seem to be named after women, which I think is interesting because I think sometimes it feels like, on reflection now, comparing this to Shakespeare and his contemporaries, it feels like we're sort of clutching at straws with that because we're like, wow, a woman has her own mind, one woman has her own mind in this play, wow. Whereas really there's a lot more women in the Greek tragedies and they have a lot more like central part of the narrative and they're a lot more involved, so that's interesting to see. And their title characters as well, which you don't see so much, I don't think, in the sort of Elizabethan plays. And he is sort of meant to be one of the most tragic poets and playwrights, and people have said that it's almost unbearable for an audience to watch. And he seems to have had quite a sad mindset as well, because it's interesting, what I didn't realise about the era is that there were comic poets that sort of did roast poetry, sort of. Like, a lot of the autobiographical information we have on these people are based on satirical roast poetry written about this guy, where they sort of like mock him, tear him apart a bit, because he had 2 failed marriages where 2 women were unfaithful to him. So apparently he decided to be a recluse, live in a cave for the rest of his life, which I think sounds a bit like extreme, but I think many people deep down, if they did have the opportunity to move to a cave after having people be unfaithful to them, maybe they would take the opportunity if that was more socially acceptable. I don't know. So maybe he did live in a cave, or maybe he didn't and everyone's just mocking him for being sad, which is a bit, I don't know. And then apparently after his death a cult was formed to him in the cave. So that's not what I was expecting went on, but also I'm not surprised because the ancient times were a bit mad. What's interesting is that he sort of takes a lot of the foundations of the previous 2 main Greek playwrights and he sort of expands on them, like the other actors that are involved. Like, it's not just a one actor thing, but like they also have more control in the narrative, more involvement in the plot, and also the language is a lot more grounded and colloquial. Like, it's still poetry, but the language is like more casual, ordinary Greek, which contrasts the fact that we are sometimes talking about big mythological stories, which apparently was meant to then be read as sort of like a parody, because if you have this big mythological story and then just like ordinary chat, like there's comic value in that. So that's considered to be some of the foundations of the comedy and romance genres. So those are the 3 main ancient Greek tragedy playwrights, and it's interesting to see stylistically what theatre was like back then. And I think theatre in both Shakespearean times and back in the ancient times was more poetry based, whereas now, comparing it to modern theatre, most modern theatre is not spoken in verse, it's spoken in really ordinary language, but seeing the basis of ordinary language start to be featured in theatre is interesting. And I'm hoping that I'm not spreading any misinformation, because I think the issue with this is that the comic poets who are mocking everyone and these satirical writers were spreading misinformation all the time, so it's hard to work out actually what was going on. Because, for example, Sophocles, there are about 3 different pieces of information and accounts of how he died, and none of them seem very plausibly. Like, did he choke on grapes? Did he try to read his play Antigone all in one breath and then like die because he wasn't breathing? Like, I don't think so. But I think I didn't realise that people back in the day were gossiping and sort of like trolling these like successful playwrights, so it makes it kind of difficult to research. So if anyone else has any more information as well, please do let me know. But I just thought it's nice to still be able to share the research as I'm going through it, because otherwise the people who are like really knowledgeable on this, there's a lot of assumed knowledge that you might have, but like starting from scratch and starting to explore it is always really exciting. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching along with me.